In this video, we are going to be talking about tuberculosis. Welcome to STEM Nerds, everybody. This is Jason. Let's get right into it. Tuberculosis is caused by Mycobacterium tuberculosis. It's otherwise known as TB. We've talked about metabolism in previous videos. I'm going to put that video in the upper right-hand corner. But tuberculosis is an example of an aerobic chemoorganotroph that associates itself as a pathogen in the human body. It's aerobic, meaning it needs oxygen as a terminal electron acceptor. It's a chemoorganotroph, meaning that it uses a chemical source of energy, and that chemical is organic. It is an acid-fast gram-positive microbe, meaning that it has mycolic acid covering the peptidoglycan on the cell wall. That makes it difficult to gram stain, and so the acid-fast test is one of the ways in which you could diagnose tuberculosis. This is a very slow-growing organism. Usually takes 12 hours or more for it to double in its population size. That is a very long time, and that presents some problems when it comes to treatment, as we're going to see later on. This microbe, this infection, this pathogen has been around pretty much as long as humans. Hippocrates, way back in 400 BC, actually wrote about it, identified it. In the Middle Ages, it was widespread in Europe, and at that time it was called consumption. It wasn't given the name tuberculosis until the 1830s, and by 1865, we're in that golden age of microbiology. It was shown to be contagious. By 1882, Robert Koch showed that it was M. tuberculosis bacteria, and that it was in fact a bacterial infection. In the 1900s, before the advent of vaccines and antibiotics, they had sanatoriums, and these sanatoriums were places where people could separate themselves from the healthy, where they would get fresh air and rest, and hopefully not spread the disease as much as if they were in the population. A vaccine was developed in 1921, and by the 1940s, with the advent of antibiotics, we were able to treat people with tuberculosis. TB is an airborne pathogen. That means you can contract TB by somebody who has an active case of tuberculosis. They could be coughing, they could be sneezing, talking, singing. If they have a latent infection, it's not as easy to spread that around, but if they have an active case and you inhale those microbes, a person could get tuberculosis. So it starts with the inhaled droplets. Those microbes wind up in the lungs. Macrophages, which are innate immune system cells, do what they're supposed to do. They recognize the pathogen. They gobble it up like they're supposed to. The problem is TB can live inside of macrophages. They can basically get around the defense mechanisms that the macrophage use to break the cells down. Macrophages then do what they're supposed to do. As they encounter an infection, they send signals to other innate immune system cells to come to the area to prevent the infection. Unfortunately, that just provides more homes for the TB, and that eventually, if you get enough of those cells together, can form those characteristic granulomas that you'll see in x-rays. If these granulomas rupture in an active case of TB, they can actually go to other parts of the body or continue to cause more damage in the respiratory system. And again, just because somebody has been exposed to tuberculosis, even if the TB organism is living inside the respiratory system, doesn't necessarily mean they have an active case. Sometimes the immune system can wall it off and prevent the infection from spreading, in which case there would be a latent TB infection. So symptoms. Symptoms usually are going to be a cough that lasts longer than 3 weeks, potentially some chest pain, potentially coughing up blood, night sweats, weight loss, fever, fatigue. If left untreated, eventually death. So there are areas of special interest when it comes to tuberculosis: healthcare facilities that are in disrepair or are being poorly run, areas where there's poor ventilation, areas where there's a lot of overcrowding, areas where there is a high population of HIV individuals that have a weakened immune system. This graph from the World Health Organization shows where TB is most predominant, and you can see special interest on the continent of Africa, especially in countries near the equator, parts of South America, and parts of Asia. You can see the incidence per 100,000 of the population per year. Those dark green areas, greater than 500 people per 100,000. As a reference point in the United States, it's around 2.9 people per 100,000. And so if you're traveling to the countries in those dark green areas, you should take extra precautions. In the United States, cases have been falling for decades. With the exception, you see right around 2020, we're starting to see a slight increase in the number of cases of TB. And so while it's good news in the United States overall, the number of cases have fallen significantly. That is not true, as we've already seen throughout the rest of the world. We're still looking at about 10 million people worldwide contracting TB every year and about 1.3 million deaths as of 2022. So how do you diagnose this disease? Well, you can do a TB skin test, and that is perhaps the most common way, certainly in the United States, where they inject a little bit of that TB protein under the skin and look for a reaction in about 48 to 72 hours. If that reaction happens, that means that you have been exposed to TB at some time in the past. Usually the next step in that process could be a chest x-ray where they look to see if there is an accumulation of those granulomas, and here would be a positive chest x-ray. You can do a sputum culture as well. That sputum culture would then be sent over to a lab. That lab would do some genetic testing, possibly also do a little bit of microbiology there where they can grow the microbes in culture and then do the acid fast stain and look for the microbes that way. But at this point, the PCR test polymerase chain reaction, that is the way to go, and they can get a positive identification doing that. Now, when it comes to treatment, remember what we said at the beginning of the video. This is an organism that grows very, very slowly. And it sounds kind of counterintuitive, but that can actually make the treatment a little bit more complicated because antibiotics usually work best when a microbe is trying to actively grow. And if you have a slow-growing microbe, that usually means the antibiotics that are going to be used are going to have to be used for a longer period of time. And so the isoniazid, rifampin, ethambutol, these are the types of antibiotics that are usually used, but they might have to be taken for up to 6 to 12 months. To compound the issue, there is a lot of multi-drug resistance going on with TB, especially in areas where there's a lot of HIV positive people. And so now you're dealing with the fluoroquinolones, linezolid, and this can take up to 1 to 2 years to treat individuals who have multi-drug resistant TB. And the second line drugs that are used to treat TB have significant side effects. In fact, in some countries, they have medical professionals that make sure the patients are actually taking the drugs because the drugs have such side effects. A lot of patients don't want to continue taking them. To prevent tuberculosis, well, proper PPE, personal protective equipment, especially in a healthcare setting, is really important. The vaccine is still used in some parts of the world, and that is a great preventative. However, it's not used in the United States because the vaccine, as it turns out, will protect small children, infants, from getting the pulmonary form of tuberculosis, but it doesn't really do a great job of protecting adults, and the focus has been primarily in preventing it in other ways. The TB skin test is also a problem. If someone has a vaccine, they're going to show positive results for that TB skin test. So the bottom line is, when it comes to tuberculosis, yes, it is still a problem in the world. It is a slightly growing concern in the United States, and we just need to be aware that it still exists. Take the precautions when necessary, certainly when traveling abroad to an area where there's a higher TB rate. Stay healthy, take your vitamins. As always, everybody, thank you so much for being here. Have a great week.